Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ed Cervone from Thomas College, and we'd like to welcome you to the second installment of the Education Innovators Speaker Series. This series is made possible through a partnership with Educate Maine, Thomas College's Center for Innovation in Education, the Education Action Forum of Maine, and the Education Foundation located at the State Chamber of Commerce. We'd also like to give a special shout out to our friends at Unum today for helping us secure our excellent keynote. Let's go over some logistics. The format is as follows today. You're going to hear from our guest keynote on the topic of the day. This will be followed by responses from two Maine educators, and we will end with some Q&A. People should utilize the chat function to log in their questions, or they have the ability to do the raise hand feature and you will be called on. Please remember that this is being recorded and will be available after today for further viewing. So on to today's topic. Today's topic is equity in education, and we are pleased to welcome three wonderful speakers today. First, we have Dr. Marsha Drake, and she is the Chief Equity Officer for Hamilton County Schools in Tennessee. For those of you not familiar with Tennessee, that's where Chattanooga is located. We also want to welcome our Maine educator, Cindy Soule. She is a fourth grade teacher at the Gerald E. Talbot School in Portland, Maine. And she also is the 2021 Maine State Teacher of the Year. And last but not least, we'd like to welcome Brittany Ray. Brittany is the Executive Director of TREE, which stands for Trauma Responsive Equitable Education. That is located down east in beautiful Millbridge, Maine. She was also the 2007 State Teacher of the Year. So without further ado, let's get this started, and I'd like to turn this over to Dr. Drake. Dr. Drake, thank you. You're muted, Dr. Drake.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen now. Good afternoon. I'm excited to be here, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to share our equity journey that we've taken here in Hamilton County. Here in Hamilton County, we have a goal of being the fastest improving school district in the state of Tennessee. And in order to achieve that goal, we feel that it's important that we create pathways to a bright future for our students here and equipping them with the skills that they need to reach their full potential. And with that, we have 5 strategic goals, and equity is threaded throughout those goals. And of course, our goals: accelerating student achievement, building future-ready students, making sure that every student has a great teacher and a great leader, a engaged community, and that we have efficient and effective operations. But the reason that I am so excited that I get to wake up every day and think about equity is because if you did not notice, that little lady on the screen there, that's actually me. When I was in the 3rd grade, and the students that I currently serve and advocate for, they remind me a lot of myself. Growing up, I grew up in a single parent home here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And we were, I guess, what would have been labeled as homeless because we were doubled up. And we lived with my grandmother, and I had 2 siblings in the home as well. I really, I enjoyed going to school because frankly, that was the only place that I was actually treated like someone of my age. Once I got home, I had a lot of duties to carry out and caring for my siblings while my mother and grandmother were at work. But fast forward to today, my why is, another why is those 2 boys that you see right there. Those are my sons, and the oldest is 14 now, and then the youngest is 10, CJ and Chase, and so it's very important that we get this equity thing right, not only for the 40,000 students that we serve here in Hamilton County, but that we get it right for my boys. My boys attend our public schools here in Hamilton County, and it's very important that we do right by all of our students, including the 2 Black boys that I am raising. Here in Hamilton County, as I just stated, we have about 40,000 students. And of that 40,000 students, 50% of our students are white students. So there's a little over 20,000 white students in our district. 26% of our students are African American students. So that's about 10,976 students. 16% are Hispanic students, which is about 6,887 students. And then 4% of our students have indicated that they are two or more races. But when we look at our teacher makeup, we have approximately 2,769 teachers here in Hamilton County. But of those, and we have 2,769 white teachers, but we only have 255 African American students, 23 Hispanic teachers, and 23 teachers that identify that they are 2 or more races. So the majority of our workforce in our classrooms are white females, and the percentage of African American teachers in our district, that 255, which is about 8% of our staff here in the district. And that number has been about, or that percentage has been about the same for over 15 years. And whenever we look at our state test results and our proficiency rate, looking at that, 70% of our test takers fall in a subgroup. 70%. 30% of our test takers are not in a subgroup. However, those are the ones that are the most successful of our test takers. That 30% that is not in a subgroup, they're outperforming that 70% by leaps and bounds. And then when we take a closer look at our data, and this is benchmark data because we did not take a state test on last year, but this is our benchmark data. And we look at our benchmark data over the last 3 years, or the last couple of years here, we notice that looking at this, that regardless of our social economic status, that our African American students are performing far lower, or they're not proficient, about half as likely to be proficient on our benchmarks than our white students that are non-economically disadvantaged, or even our white students that are economically disadvantaged. And when we look at our Hispanic data, we see that the results are pretty much identical to that of our African American students when they're compared to the white students and their performance on tests. So once we really took a deep look and we followed those trends, we knew that we needed to take a different approach. and actually look at making some equity moves within our district. And so some of those moves that we've done in our district is, one of the things, we've increased our title funding and decreased our student to teacher ratios and added staff. And so what I mean by that is that we did our formula where we cut out some of our schools, and that there had to be a higher threshold for socioeconomically disadvantaged students in order to receive those funds. And then that allowed us to hire more teachers in those schools and to lower that teacher to student ratio. We also increased, so we hired more school counselors, making sure that there is a school counselor in every school here locally. And we also increased our social workers within the schools. So our school counselors are serving like 1 to 500 students. And our school social workers, the goal is for them to serve 1 to 2,000 students. We've also increased our arts and our STEM opportunities and made sure that they were in all of our schools and not just in our affluent schools. And we improved our teacher retention rates. And what we did through that is we offer some mentoring for teachers, as well as we offer after school PD such as this for our teachers. And then we increased or improved our fill and vacancy rates. And what I mean by that is that our schools that are the high poverty schools, we allowed those schools to actually post their vacancies early and to give them a jump start on some of the best and the brightest teachers. So they actually are posting and filling their positions starting in about December, whereas the rest of the district, they will post their openings around April. And we increased our advanced placement course offerings. Previously in our high minority schools, the schools that were the majority minority schools, we didn't even have advanced courses there. And so now we are offering advanced placement courses in all of our high schools. We created a more inclusive learning environment across the districts. We found that another one of the practices that we had been doing previously is that we were grouping students, and we only had certain sites throughout the district. So now it is that we're no longer doing that, and across the district, we are practicing inclusive teaching and co-teaching practices across the district. This is something that we had done actually when I began teaching, because I was an inclusion teacher, but we had gotten away from those practices. So we have reinstated those practices across the district. Another thing is that we found with looking at our data that African American students were 7 times more likely to be suspended or in ISS, placed outside of the learning environment. And it could be for the same incidences that occurred with some of our other students, our white students. But our African American students had more severe consequences for their behaviors. So we developed a district-wide code of acceptable behavior in which it still gives you options, but for a particular incident, you have about 4 or 5 things that you can that is acceptable for that behavior, so that it's more of a uniform approach, and consequences are given out in a way across the district in a more equitable way. As well as we doubled the support for our English language learners. We did not have a significant amount of teachers, nor did we have the supports that that the teachers needed in order to carry out those best practices. And we did not have anybody looking at that on a daily basis to bring to us some of the best practices and some of the best PD that would really influence and move our English language learners. So we've doubled those supports, not only in the classrooms, but we have leads that actually lead that work across the district in those classrooms. We've also decreased our leadership turnover. We had just a culture here in our district where we would have a principal leader, and they would only remain at a school for about 3 to 5 years, and then they would be moved to a different school. So we have decreased that turnover rate and allow the leaders to remain in those schools and built the culture and climate that's needed for success within our schools. We've also formed some valuable partnerships within our district. Of course, through the pandemic, we have really that has really put a spotlight on a lot of our inequities. And of course, one of them was the access to internet when we went totally remote. And so we formed a partnership with one of our local providers here where they're providing Wi-Fi for low-income homes, the students that qualify for Title I. And they're providing that internet service to that family for up to 10 years without any charge. As well as we have some rural areas, and we are providing some hotspots for those areas as well. And then when we did go completely remote, and we realized that we had some of the Wi-Fi issues, and they did not have access to that in the homes, then we actually provided some television programming throughout the pandemic. We did have teachers that taught lessons, and we also gave tips to parents. We updated them on information, and we held some, and even had like a hotline during some of the broadcasts where they could call in and actually ask questions. And we had a Spanish line available on those programs as well. We expanded our innovation and school choice options, which means that some of our schools that were not filled to capacity, we opened them up as open enrollment schools. And that way you would have a choice and you would not necessarily have to attend the school within your community that may not be performing as well. And also we opened up more available slots in our magnet schooling. So we did look close at that, and we found out that they were holding a lot of spots and they weren't to capacity either. And so we were able to open up some of those spots and target some of our Hispanic and our African American communities, and to inform them of those opportunities to attend those magnet schools. And we had outreach enrollment or application events so that they could apply for those spots. In the summer, we provided a summer reach program, which was an in-person learning program. And we actually we sent something out where we recruited our highly qualified teachers to teach in that program over the summer, and our kids that performed the lowest on our benchmarks were the ones that were invited to participate in this program. We created a social emotional learning department where we are addressing the whole child and putting a lot of those supports in place to wrap around the student that we had gotten away from, as well as we're developing individualized student success plans that look at the needs of individual students. And right now, this is a really piloted program with the goal of expanding this entire program across the district by 2023. But with that comes a children's cabinet. So with those results, this is really focusing on what the students are doing outside of the classroom and where they're spending their time and what they're doing there. And the kids that are participating in the programs, which ones are most effective. And through that children's cabinet, that allows us to communicate to those outside providers. And so we've been able to do a lot of provide a lot of different opportunities, such as with the remote learning, establishing some of our learning pods, smaller learning pods through the school closure at a lot of these community centers and community churches. But we also recognize that you can only go so far with making some of these moves. And if you remember when I said earlier, we had done some of these things, and the inclusive going through and having inclusive classroom inclusion throughout the district, that was something we had done, but we did not have a policy that actually protected and allowed us to continue that. So we could stop it and start it at any time. And as administration changed, then some of those practices changed. However, we are on at the last board meeting, I'm proud to say that we had our first reading of our educational equity policy. And at our next board meeting, it should pass and become a part of our board policy, where our board really publicly acknowledges that they believe in equity, and they believe that every student should have an excellent public school, public education, regardless of the community that they live in and they come in, and the color of their skin, their social economic background. So this is really a win-win for our district, and we are so thankful that our board is supporting us, and that we are putting this policy. We're actually putting our money where our mouth is, because this will allow us to continue to fund all of our projects throughout the district based on this policy. But are you thinking about making some equity moves there in Maine? Well, so here's some takeaways for teachers. First, I would ask that you examine your own biases. And I've included here a website where you can go and you can do this in your own home, in the own privacy of your own home, just you and the computer, and you can take it and then it will identify some of the biases that you have that you can actually work on based on the results. Also, begin some inclusive practices within your own district, within your own classroom. And it's not enough just to be invited to the dance, but the students have to be asked to dance and participate. So whatever you can do to include your students in your classes, that would be outstanding. Increase opportunities for students of color to close those opportunity gaps, such as we've done by allowing, when there are schools that are not at capacity, and those schools are actually, they're doing quite well academically, open up some of those spaces for other students throughout the community. And then lastly, create culturally responsive classrooms. And with this, there is an author by the name of Zaretta Hammond. And we've used this as a book study within our district with some of our teachers, the culturally responsive teaching and the brain. And it is an excellent book to use for that. Okay, thank you. I am unsure of who's going next, but that concludes my presentation.
Thanks, Dr. Drake. We're going to have Cindy Soule up next with some comments.
Thank you, Dr. Drake. Much of what you said really resonates me as we serve very similar populations. So I teach at Gerald E. Talbot School in Portland, Maine, and we have about 440 students. We fluctuate between 75 and 80% of those students receiving free and reduced lunch. And we have 11 different languages represented here. And it is just a beautiful place to be. We have about 50% English learners, and I learn every day from my students. And so as I was listening to you speak, I wanted to connect back to what you said about equity being a thread in your strategic plan and how you referenced the importance of closing the opportunity gap for our marginalized students. And that is something that I am very passionate about, and my colleagues are very passionate about, and this district here in Portland, Maine is very passionate about. So one thing that I find helpful in my practice is to really intentionally think about the purpose of everything I do, whether it's at a school level, whether it's in my own classroom, whether it's as a leader in the district, and now as Maine Teacher of the Year. So I'm considering that always. And then as I consider that, I also have to think, is this practice denying anyone an opportunity to access that practice that I'm offering? And also revisit how are the practices that I have in place working, and how are the practices that I want to change and I've tried to change, are my goals being met? And so as you talked about equity moves, I really thought of some SEL practices that have been really critical, and the role that it plays in working in a school where students face a lot of trauma. And I think these practices are critical for schools across the nation, irregardless of the population you serve, because it does affect student achievement positively. It does create future ready students. It does create the engaged learning community. Those critical goals of your district just made my heart sing. And so one thing that I want to highlight is the idea of identity, and thinking about starting the year off and having students celebrated for who they are. So they enter your classroom feeling safe and comfortable, being who they are and sharing their ideas. So one way we do that is we celebrate our students. And so we do identity maps. And I have this reference. This is a wonderful book, Sarah K. Ahmed, Being the Change. And it has a ton of activities teachers can do with this identity work, and an identity web is part of that. So we create webs, and we discuss our intersectionality, all the different things we are, and we find connections and differences, and we talk about it. It's really amazing. And one of the other things we do is we celebrate our names, and we make sure everyone in our community is saying our name correctly. And this continues, this practice of thinking about students' identity runs right through our RTI process. When we sit down to discuss a student, we talk about everything about that student. We think of the whole child and all of their the intersectionality of all their different components of who they are. And so we might have a student who has a single parent mother, who also has an IEP for behavior, who also is identified through Chapter 104, who also is an English learner, and who is Black. And those factors are really critical as we design interventions to support the students' needs. We also have an SEL curriculum. We use Second Step, which has been amazing. It provides a common language. We do the lessons as proactive teaching of skills, but then more importantly, the teachers reinforce them. We ourselves model the things we're asking our students to do. And one amazing thing that I love about our school is we have what's called the Calming Corner. Now, in pandemic, they have their own calming kits that our amazing social workers found funding for, and somehow we had these little baggies with all these special tools for calming showed up. But in a non-pandemic situation, we have a corner in our room that has a desk or however teachers set it up, and we were provided the tools we needed to implement that successfully. And that's a critical part of it. If you're asking teachers to do these things, they need the tools to be able to be successful with them. And so back to like we model empathy because we listen to our students. And when our students are down or not able to access the learning of the day, we're not on them like, you have to do this. We're recognizing they're hurting and we're listening and we're giving the space and time to live with whatever is painful. And they have a little timer. And if the timer goes off and the strategies at the Common Corner didn't work, then we are able to call. And every single time I have called and said, I have a student who accessed the Common Corner and they need further support, somebody has shown up at my door to help. And that is amazing. And that speaks to the people you were talking about, Dr. Drake, like adding people to support the goals of your school. So, but ultimately, I believe that teachers' superpowers are ourselves and our beliefs in our students. Like if we show our students that we believe in them, they're going to believe in themselves too. So another really exciting practice that I want to share is this idea about literacy and how equity is so central to that. And as a nation, we are in I heard a woman who is affiliated with Barbara Bush's initiative, and I cannot think of her name, but she said, we are in an epidemic of unfulfilled potential. Just let those words resonate for a minute. Those words sit with me every day as I'm facing my beautiful students and looking at our data across our country that shows in the last 20 years, we have made limited, maybe 0.2% growth in our reading proficiency. So what that looks like is we are 30% proficient as a nation. And for eighth graders, what that means is that 30% of eighth graders read at a sixth grade reading level. And this equity issue needs to be at the forefront of educators' minds and policy. So it's something that I'm very passionate about. I live in a neighboring community that doesn't face the same types of challenges. And I have for years seen kids outscore and outperform a community that's right next door. And it frustrates me because I don't agree with standardized testing. I'm not saying I'm a proponent of it, but what I really have honed in on in my experiences is that we also need to look at the ways we're preparing students to transfer skills. And I think what has happened, as we've noticed, our nation is not performing well in proficiency of reading. We've overemphasized that. At the elementary level in Maine, there was a survey done by Maine Mathematics and Science Alliance that indicated that elementary students only get 9 hours of science instruction, and it's typically in isolation, so not embedded within literacy. And that is problematic. And students have been taught literacy skills in isolation, and it really doesn't help them transfer those skills. So I'm a huge fan of science, and I'm proud to say that so is our Portland schools and our leader, Principal Ann Hanna here at Gerald D. Talbot. And we have started this quest for implementing science, and it's hard. There is not, teachers face obstacles as far as time and curriculum, but there is a way. And I've been doing this, and it's shown a huge difference. Last year, we were able to do access testing, and 15 of 23 fourth graders here at Gerald D. Talbot exited the access test, which is really remarkable. And of those who did not, all but 3 of them met their year's growth. And the 3 who did not were dually identified as students with an IEP as well. So that, I can't say it's because of science, because the research wasn't done, but in my heart, and after 21 years of teaching here, that's what I believe. And so I'm encouraging people to look at their elementary schools and embed their literacy skills in content. Students are curious and they have questions. And if you harness that, you're going to provide access, relevancy, critical thinking. And so what does that look like? Right now with the NGSS, it's you give the students a puzzling phenomenon and you say, check this out. And so for an example, I found this, we were doing a earth science unit, and I found this amazing video that a Department of Transportation worker in Freeport, Maine filmed. It's a heavy rain. The groundwater is rising. And all of a sudden the road just underneath just collapsed, and this big, huge drainage pipe pops up out of the ground, and the kids sit there. It's only like 2 minutes and 30 seconds. And when that happens, they're like, whoa. And then you say, how could this happen? And together they make sense of it and they figure it out. And it's a shared experience. So it's not excluding anyone. Everybody's seen the thing you're trying to figure out, and they bring everything they know to the sense-making process. And it builds a community. You're like, whoa, you've been to Freeport too? Yeah, I've been to Freeport. Let's go see that. Like they just find these interesting connections that are unrelated and related. And it's really exciting to see. It increases the student voice and decreases the teacher's voice. I become like this guide where I'm navigating students along this amazing journey of building knowledge. Students are motivated to share ideas. They develop vocabulary. All the things we know our marginalized students and all students need to close that opportunity gap. So, and we want to send our students out into the world so that they can see they have the ability to make changes. So as we're thinking about systems and as we're thinking about this equity work, remember it's traditions, practices, and policies. And practices are not people. It's not anything anyone should take personally. It's a practice that has been in place. And as a community of amazing Mainers, we need to start looking at those and making changes when we see data that does not match. An example of that is at our school, we did data analysis of our office discipline referrals. As you were saying, Dr. Drake, it matches some of the concerns you had. Our Black boys were having an increased number of discipline referrals, and we had to look hard at that data, and it did not feel good. But once we looked at it and we said, okay, what are we going to do about it? We made a plan and we've made changes that have improved that. And that's really critical with some of these other things we put into place with recognizing students' identities and making each student feel valued. So we really need to center our decisions on our marginalized students. And I just want to share that when I heard Amanda Gorman's poem at the inauguration, I thought about what she said in her closing. The light has always been there, if only we are brave enough to see it. And in that moment, I realized that all along, my students have been the light. They are the light. They are joyous, they are brilliant, and they deserve to have their needs considered as we look to change our system, practices, and policies so that all students can feel brilliant. All students can have their genius cultivated, as Dr. Goldie Muhammad says. And we can send forth students into our world knowing that they are equipped with knowledge, the communication competencies they need to be brilliant problem solvers. And, it is just really exciting to see how the SEL practices science and so many other things I wish I had time to share, but I'm here. And if anybody ever wants to reach out, you can follow me at Soule. I got to think about my Twitter. I think it might be at Soule Cindy on Twitter, and you can definitely reach out to me in other places. But I'm just really excited to share the changes that have happened at my school. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Cindy. And next, we're going to have Brittany Ray share her experiences in this area.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you, Dr. Drake. It really hit home when I heard you say, we need to just start getting it right for your boys, right? And we need to start getting it right for so many students. And thank you, Cindy. I often tell people I'm a person who's stuck in the 1980s, right? And so when I heard you, I thought of that song, Save the Best for Last, and I knew that I didn't fit that category. But I thought of two other categories I might fit. And that is, how many of you know Kenny Rogers? And sort of might have been sad when Kenny passed. Okay, yeah. So there's that song, Through the Years, You've Never Let Me Down, right? You Turned My Life Around. And I'm thinking about how, for me, education felt like that. But there are too many kids that through the years, education is letting down. And the other 1980 song that I'm stuck on is Eddie Money. Anybody remember Eddie Money? I want to go back and do it all over, but I can't go back. I know, I'm not a singer. But anyway, if I could go back and do things differently and change things, it would be great. But we know we can't go back, so we need to move forward. And I'm the current executive director of a program called TREE. And TREE operates here in Eastern Maine. And we started a pilot program about 5 years ago where we really focused on trauma responsive practices within the school, how to help adults better understand how to respond to students who were having difficulties. And we have seen great success in so many areas here in Washington County. We have a wonderful partnership also with the Biddeford School District in Southern Maine and some partnerships in rural California. And here in Washington County, in the schools that Tree supported with our focus on trauma responsive practices, we saw a tremendous increase in test scores. We saw a reduction in chronic absenteeism, really greater parent involvement. And our biggest feature of our Tree program is a focus on student voice and really listening to students and engaging with them and helping them articulate the injustices they see in their world and how we might creatively solve those together with adult partnerships. And so while that is all exciting, I also need to share some sad things. In this last year of working in schools here in Washington County, we've seen a pushback. We thought things were going so well with our trauma responsive approach. But you cannot be trauma responsive if we don't have a focus on equity. And the more we talked about equity, the greater the pushback in our schools. And perhaps I might make mention that Washington County is a county that has a predominantly 60% voted for President Trump. And while that doesn't define who someone is, there is a link between the language that was being used and an emboldened sense of white privilege. And so just recently, my team and I have been witnessing a lot of things that will make one sad. For example, when kids are rough on the playground, playing basketball, just the students that were rough are not allowed to play basketball anymore at recess. But when students were rough in soccer, soccer was banned from recess for the year. Now here in Washington County, although Maine is a very white state, we have a 30% Latinx population. Soccer was what really was wanting to be played by students, but yet basketball and football would never be banned from recess. We also are seeing a struggle with students not being called by their given name. Flo Roberto, Alondra, Yasmin, their Flo, or their Jasmine, even on a name tag on a desk. We're also seeing, like you mentioned, Dr. Drake and Cindy, really discrepancies with discipline and who is noted to have that old practice of the name on the board. When we look at the descriptions of office referrals for pre-K and kindergarten and first grade students, we notice that in certain areas, we see that the descriptors that go with students of color are aggressive, sneaky, manipulative, dangerous, and violent. And this might be a student who has no English language at this time, but that's the descriptors that are being used. And so when we saw this with our own eyes, we said, what do we do? And sometimes you can make headway with school boards and with administration, and sometimes you can't. And so you have to find another pathway. And currently our Tree pathway is to really focus on how do we shift some type of action to the community. So our Tree program has been working within the community to do book study groups with white fragility, with me and white supremacy, and really trying to engage more of our white population to really reach outside of the box or the comfort zone we've been in and stretch and try to see things in a different way. And the more we see people doing this, there's this momentum happening. And while I wish that the Department of Education could say that school districts in our area have to have an equity audit, I believe that if we have these conversations, public taxpayers will start asking for these equity audits so that we can really get to the bottom of this. Another thing that we're really working on is social emotional learning in a very unique way called moving stories. And these moving stories are in the sand tray. And if you ever want to know about these moving stories, then it's a literacy component, but it really offers a chance for students to have a voice. And just yesterday, during a moving story, one little girl said, "I'm really sad." And when we asked her why she was sad, she says, "Because I'm tired of disguising my Spanish voice." She said, "I'm so stupid in English, but I'm really smart in Spanish, and I don't want to disguise my voice anymore. My dad, my brother know how to disguise their voice, but my mom doesn't. She's left out." And that was just another reminder of how much work we have to do in this area. We have to do this. And even I love to celebrate the places that are doing wonderful things. And we are doing wonderful things in the schools here in Washington County, but there's also a place for more. And that is, I think, also in the communities. And finally, I would like to share that the TREE program is launching a new program called TreeFellows. And in TreeFellows, we are going to be seeking applications from teachers who are interested in having an action research project based in equity. And they'll be supported by professors from Colby and the University of Maine. And it will be very explicit. And when we talk about trauma responsive practices, it won't just be interventions or a checklist. It will be putting equity front and center and making sure that we start asking who's not being served, who is not getting what they need, and giving additional resources to those students. So I'm hoping that, I wish I could think of a theme song that could perhaps end this segment that I've shared with you, because I know I shared some things that I think are particularly sad, but I also think that certainly listening to Cindy and Dr. Drake, I'm pretty energized about the way we can create this cohort of teachers within Maine who have action research projects within their classroom focused on equity and supported in a cohort where we can maybe have folks from Madawaska talking to folks in Biddeford and folks in Harrington, Maine, talking to folks in Farmington, and finding what it is that we can share to really tackle the hard work that needs to be done around equity. Thank you.
Thank you, Brittany, for sharing. And I'm Jason Judd, the Executive Director of Educate Maine, and I just want to really thank each one of the panelists. We've got some time for questions, and I'm going to help out handling a number of the questions for the last part of our conversation. We heard about a whole variety of different experiences and practices that are working in many districts, and some challenges certainly as well. So the first question I wanted to share came up in the chat, and it's for Dr. Drake. There's some interest in hearing a little bit more about your SEL department, which you referenced on your slide, and sort of how that connects with some of the curriculum decisions with community partners and others specifically. As you heard from our main panelists, there's a lot of really good work happening around social and emotional learning here in our state. So there's some interest in hearing more about it in your district from a district-wide perspective. So could you share a few more details?
Okay, sure. So it is new. This is only our second year, and we continue to build it out. And so we are using the curriculum that we're using is a Pure Edge mindfulness curriculum currently. And within that, we have also, of course, we developed the Code of Acceptable Behavior. But another thing we are building out support for our elementary school. So we have some behavioral specialists, some trauma-informed specialists, as well. And they're working with our SEL department. So throughout this past year, we've done a lot of working with them, with our students virtually. But we have just recently opened back up. And so we're getting back into schools and we are holding small groups, some of the restorative circles with the Restorative Justice. We're doing those things as well. And those are mainly in our secondary schools that we are promoting those and carrying those out. Also, one of the larger things that we're doing within our SEL department, and they're carrying this out, is that we're focusing on positive school-wide behavioral supports, and our entire district should be trained in that by the end of this school year. Now, it may be a little difficult to meet that goal since we've been virtual, where we have about 9 schools that we still need to take through that training. And we have 76 schools here in our district. We are, that's one of the big components of our SEL.
Great, thank you so much.
Mhm.
And I'm going to share another question with one of the other panelists, and I think it came from our friend Luke Shorty, and it's really about how we heard about some of the challenges in some districts where there might not be district support or school support for equity work. Is there a way for rural districts and small schools to work together around equity? So I'm going to have Brittany start off with any ideas she has about kind of multiple schools in rural communities working together and sharing resources and expertise.
So I think that what we might have learned with the TREE program is that we were working to change school climate with an entire school. And so we really put our funding into changing school climate, with everyone in the school. But we realized that that's not the best way to target our work. And so that's where we came up with the TreeFellows idea. We know that in some parts of the country, new teachers are supported by something called the New Teacher Center. But we really were wondering, what do we do for teachers who feel alone and isolated in this work? And maybe at their mid-career level. And so that's why we've created this new program called TreeFellows that will allow just what you're talking about. It'll involve some summer work where folks come together to really sort of provide some sort of common foundation. And then there'll be bi-weekly meetings monthly where you'll be supported in a cohort of learners that are really just tackling equity issues. And right now we're currently looking to put that application out in April and finding ways for educators to actually ask their districts to help pay for this. But we really believe that the best work can be done in many ways by us, right? It's not always having somebody come in to give an outside presentation on implicit bias or something like that. It's really digging deep into the problems that are affecting us every single day and working together to solve those.
Great, thanks, Brittany. And we'll make sure to get the fellows' information out to participants when it's available. So I'm going to ask the next question of Cindy, and it came from Bonnie in the chat. And it's really about sort of the balancing act, you being a state teacher of the year, as well as a classroom educator, as well as really involved with your district. This question is about how you're balancing prioritizing the short-term needs to support individual students and families with some of the more long-term needs of addressing structural inequities in school practices and policies. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about that balancing act, because I think you're certainly trying to do both in your role this year.
Absolutely. And, like I said, my beautiful students are here in front of me, and that has certainly been a priority. So I think one of the things that really has helped our school community is the idea of collective efficacy. We have really developed systems of sharing the workload, and really we do a lot of co-planning. So we're all involved with that part. but we share and we trust that each other is going to be able to do the components, and it really has helped. So remote assignments is a perfect example of that. We plan out how the unit's going to go, and we each put our name in an area to do remote assignments. As far as the equity and looking at the state as in my work as teacher of the year, those who know me best know that I want change and I want it now. And I think about like Maya Angelou's quote, right? Do what you know until you know better. And when you know better, do better. And I can't unknow what I know. I've done so much individualized growth since the death of George Floyd and all of the Black Lives Matter movement. And it has really changed the way that I teach. And so one of the things that I think about working at a school that has a population of marginalized students, I really wonder about this idea of equity versus equality. We talk about it in so many ways, but as a school, the structure, the time we are together forces us to put into place practices that deny students opportunities to core curriculum, because there's not enough time for students who need intervention support and all the other things that they might need. And those things are valuable, but students should not have to miss their core instruction and be a part of a classroom community. So I'm really trying to just use every opportunity to speak up and say things and offer my experiences and, learn from people who are more advanced in this work. And I think if we continue to unite our voices and say, this is something we need to look at the structure of schools. We need to put our most marginalized students in front and center. And we need to just talk about those changes, and we can't be afraid of them. We have to say, now is the time. And we can't do it all. We got to do one thing at a time. So patience as well with the things we can be patient with.
Great. Thank you, Cindy. And I think that's it. We've got to wrap up our conversation today. Our hour went by very quickly, and just want to thank the presenters that joined us today. You'll notice in the chat, there's a short survey for you to complete. So please feel free to complete the survey. Give us some feedback about what you'd like to see next, as well as resources that you might need to support equity here in our state. Really grateful for Dr. Drake, for Cindy, and for Brittany of sharing their experiences and being vulnerable about what's working well and where the challenges are. Also want to thank our partners who are with us for each one of these Innovators series presentations. We heard from Ed at the beginning from Thomas College, the Education Action Forum of Maine, and the Maine State Chamber of Commerce Education Foundation, and of course, Educate Maine. This talk was supported also by UNUM, and we appreciated the connection to Dr. Drake because UNUM has some great work happening in both Maine and Chattanooga and across the country to support racial equity, and we're thankful for them. And please be on the lookout for dates for our next speaker series presentation, as well as we'll send out the survey and some resources in the next 24 hours for you folks to consider. So with that, I hope everybody has a great afternoon and is inspired with some of the things that were shared today. There's great work happening in this area, but as we heard from our panelists, we have a lot more to do here in Maine to serve the students across the state. So with that, everybody have a great day, and we appreciate you joining us.